Number two, don't live in the what ifs. Don't live in the what ifs. There's a really important principle that I've learned. There's no such thing as hypothetical grace. There's no such thing as hypothetical grace. Two truths I see from Scripture. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take care of itself. Sufficient for today is the trouble for today. And then in 2 Corinthians, Paul says that Jesus told him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. I think if you combine these two together, here's the story. God has allotted to each one of us a certain amount of trouble for each day, a certain amount of trial for each day. He's allowed so much trial to come into your day. And he has promised that whatever that amount of trial is, he has given you the amount of grace for that trial, for that day. And I can tell you the worst days of my life are not because of what's happening that day. It's when I start extrapolating it out and saying it's always going to be like this. Or I start thinking, I'll never be able to do this tomorrow and the next day and the next day. But if I can bring myself back to the day and say, has God given me the grace for today? The answer has always been yes. So then this next question, what makes me think that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and he's not going to give me the grace for tomorrow? Nothing. But when I start bringing the what ifs in, and I start grabbing the worries of tomorrow and bringing them into today, all of a sudden I have more on my plate than the grace that I have, and I'm tanked. Here's another problem with living in the what ifs. Most of them don't happen. Even if you go to the doctor and you hear the diagnosis of cancer, there's lots of cancers, right? And sometimes there's a diagnosis of cancer and then there's a waiting period before you get the specifics of what that cancer is. And we want to go home and Google all cancers, right? And then you live in the weight of every possible cancer and every possible outcome, and you can't do it. Even when tragedy happens, all of the what ifs are not going to happen. Now, some of these things you do have to think forward. I'm not saying be blind about tomorrow. You have to make plans. You have to think through. And I think there's something healthy in even thinking through some of these what ifs and imagining yourself on the other side of them. Okay, if this happened, what would I do? Think of something. Doesn't mean that that's going to happen, but the fact that you can imagine yourself living on the other side of that calamity, there's something healthy about that too. You know what? I trust that God's going to be there and that life is going to go on. It's probably not going to go on like I imagine it, so I don't want to live in the what ifs. I want to live in the grace of today.